$400 billion, I mean, it is just a staggering number to walk your head around, right? When we think of massive global economic drivers, our minds usually go straight to tech giants, or oil, or maybe real estate. But what if I told you that a surprisingly huge chunk of this massive global economic engine is actually driven by one of the oldest spiritual traditions in human history?
Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to unpack a totally fascinating intersection today, where ancient theology meets modern jurisprudence and ultimately global macroeconomics. We're looking at Eid al-Adha. We'll be tracing its roots from a deeply personal spiritual test of faith all the way to a $400 billion global halal food market that literally shapes international supply chains today. It's an incredible journey from the micro to the macro, so let's get started.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the origins of Qurbani, move to how to pray Eid Salah, and then cover the rules of sacrifice. After that, we'll explore the spirit of sharing before zooming all the way out to that $400 billion market and its global socioeconomic impacts. Section 1. The origins of Qurbani. So Eid al-Adha literally translates to the festival of sacrifice, and it's rooted in a really profound narrative that's actually shared across the Abrahamic faiths. It commemorates this momentous event when the prophet Ibrahim, or Abraham, demonstrated his absolute ultimate devotion to God. According to the tradition, he was willing to sacrifice his beloved son, that's Ishmael in the Islamic tradition, which closely mirrors the story of Isaac in the Judeo-Christian tradition. He was going to do it in pure obedience to a divine command. But at the very last second, God intervened. He spared the son and provided a ram to be sacrificed instead. And this brilliantly illustrates how a single, ancient historical narrative can unite millions of people across the globe today. While the core story remains exactly the same, the festival has been seamlessly woven into all these different local cultures. In North Africa, it's often called Eid el-Kabir, which means the Great Holiday. Over in West and Central African nations, places like Senegal and Mali, it's known as Tabaski. In Turkey, you'll hear it called Kurban Bayrami, and in India, it's Bakrid. This incredible linguistic diversity really just shows how deeply embedded this single festival is in so many different global cultures. Section 2. How to pray Eid Salah. So let's talk about the morning of the festival. The Eid Salah is a 2 rakat prayer, meaning it consists of 2 cycles, and it's performed shortly after sunrise. The first rakat begins with the worshipper making their intention, followed by the opening takbir, saying Allahu Akbar. But here is exactly where it starts to differ from standard daily prayers. The imam leads the congregation in saying a series of extra takbirs, raising their hands each time, before reciting Surah Al-Fatiha and typically another chapter like Surah Al-Ala, and then they complete the standard bowing and prostrating. Now, what's really interesting here is the second rakah. The worshipper stands, recites the Quran, and then performs another set of extra takbirs before bowing. But the exact number of these extra takbirs, well, that actually depends on the specific school of Islamic thought. For example, the Hanafi method involves 3 extra takbirs in the first rakah and 3 in the second. The Shafi method, on the other hand, involves 7 takbirs in the first and 5 in the second. And both are completely valid. It's a really beautiful way of showcasing the rich, built-in diversity of Islamic jurisprudence. Section 3. The rules of sacrifice. Let's see how those differing schools of thought apply to the sacrifice itself. When you look at the 4 major Sunni schools, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali, there are very distinct views. Take the Hanafi school. They consider the sacrifice wajib, or obligatory, for anyone financially able to do it. But the other 3 consider it a highly recommended tradition, though not strictly mandatory. You'll also see some really specific variations in the required age of the animals. While a Hanafi might sacrifice a 6-month-old sheep if it looks mature enough, a Shafi requires the sheep to be at least a full year old, or to have already lost its front teeth. And beyond just the age, there are some pretty strict logistics for the animals themselves. A smaller animal, like a sheep or a goat, suffices for one person or a single household. But a larger animal, think a cow or a camel, well, that can be shared by up to 7 people who all pitch in for the cost. Plus, the animal absolutely must be healthy. It has to be completely free of major defects. We're talking not clearly blind, not visibly lame, and not extremely thin. The core principle here is that an offering to God must be of high quality. It requires the worshiper to genuinely sacrifice something of real value. Section 4. The spirit of sharing. Once the sacrifice is done, what happens to the meat? The traditional Islamic guideline here is the rule of thirds, and it's beautifully simple. 1/3 is kept by the family who purchased the animal. 1/3 is gifted to relatives, friends, and neighbors, which really helps foster those social bonds. And the final third? That absolutely must be given directly to the poor and needy as charity. This distribution system is quite literally designed to build social equity, ensuring that even the most underprivileged members of society get to partake in a high-protein, celebratory meal that they might otherwise never be able to afford. And what's amazing is that we see this ancient rule of thirds operating on a massive international scale today. NGOs are facilitating this charity entirely across borders. Just look at this initiative by the Al-Khidmat Foundation. For their Qurbani project, they process and tin pack an astounding 155 tons of fresh meat in Cairo, ensuring it has a 2-year shelf life, specifically to distribute to over 100,000 displaced refugees in Gaza, the West Bank, and surrounding camps. So you have this ancient requirement to feed the poor that is actively, right now, shaping modern cross-border humanitarian logistics. Of course, as times change, this tradition naturally faces some internal theological debates. The most prominent one is the substitution debate. On one side, you have classical scholars, like Ibn Qayyim, who argue that the physical act of sacrifice, the actual spilling of blood, is a specific, mandated ritual. It simply cannot be replaced. But on the other side, modern thinkers like Tariq Ramadan or Sohaib Ben Sheikh suggest that taking that financial equivalent and donating it directly to the poor might actually better serve the original spirit of the holiday, especially in context where people are quite literally starving and a physical sacrifice is just logistically impossible. There's also an ongoing external debate, particularly regarding animal welfare regulations in Western countries. Traditional Islamic practice known as zabahiyya requires the slaughter to be done with a swiftly drawn, incredibly sharp blade without prior stunning. The aim here is to drain the blood quickly and, from the traditional perspective, to minimize the animal's fear and pain. Conversely, organizations like the UK's Farm Animal Welfare Council argue that slaughtering an animal without prior electrical or mechanical stunning causes severe, unnecessary suffering. It's a deeply complex intersection of religious freedom and modern animal welfare ethics. Section 5. A $400 billion market. $415 billion. Let that sink in. Estimates suggest that the money spent globally around Eid al-Adha on animals, logistics, and related halal food products reaches this monumental figure. We're talking about millions upon millions of sheep, goats, cows, and camels being moved and purchased in an incredibly concentrated time frame. This creates an absolute massive surge in the global halal food industry. And this brings us to a truly fascinating economic reality. You would probably assume that Muslim-majority nations dominate the supply side of this massive market, right? But surprisingly, 8 of the top 10 global halal meat suppliers are actually non-Muslim-majority countries. Brazil, for instance, supplied $1.25 billion worth of poultry to Saudi Arabia in a single year. Australia is a massive exporter of halal lamb, and India is a dominant player in cattle exports. So this deeply spiritual festival effectively fuels huge agricultural sectors in South America, Oceania, and South Asia. Section 6. Global Socioeconomic Impacts. Let's drill down even further. Take the border between India and Bangladesh. Every single year, an estimated 10 million cattle are exported from India into Bangladesh. And out of that massive number, roughly 4 million are consumed during the incredibly short window of Eid al-Adha alone. This cross-border trade generates billions in revenue, but it's also a highly delicate ecosystem that relies heavily on both environmental and market stability. So the crucial point is how quickly all of this can turn into a crisis for local farmers. In the Hor wetlands of Bangladesh, farmers rely heavily on the Boro paddy harvest. But recently, early pre-monsoon rains and upstream flash floods have submerged thousands of hectares of crops right before harvest time. This causes a devastating ripple effect. With their primary income totally destroyed and facing roughly 3 billion taka in losses, these farmers are forced into distressed selling of whatever livestock assets they have, exactly when the Eid economy is supposed to be gearing up. It's a stark contrast between the macroeconomic boom of the festival and the extreme microeconomic vulnerability of the local farmers supplying the region. Ultimately, as noted by the former chairman of Bangladesh's National Board of Revenue, this festival acts as an incredible economic catalyst, because beyond just the spiritual fulfillment, the sheer mind-boggling logistics of moving millions of people for Hajj and moving millions of animals for Qurbani, it injects massive liquidity into these markets. It promotes vital border trade, creates thousands of seasonal jobs, and basically functions as a multi-layered economic stimulus package for both local and international markets. Which leaves us with this final thought. We started today with a story of ancient sacrifice out in the desert, and we ended up talking about multi-billion-dollar international trade agreements and immensely complex supply chains. How do our oldest spiritual traditions continue to unexpectedly shape the modern world? It's a really powerful reminder that culture, religion, and economics are never truly separate things. They are deeply, inextricably intertwined. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, keep asking big questions, and I'll see you next time.